Hello Fleet, and welcome to Know Your Ship episode 21 with me, Chase, and today's episode is going to be about the Northampton-class heavy cruisers. Now, the Northampton-class heavy cruisers were built within the confines of the Washington Naval Treaty. They displaced 9,200 tons, which was under the 10,000 ton limit imposed by the treaty, and they carried 9 8-inch guns in triple turrets, 2 forward and 1 aft. This layout of turret placement will be used in all subsequent US heavy cruisers. The Northampton-class heavy cruisers, however, did have one major deficiency, that being armor protection, and this is not to be unexpected. Many of the designers working under the limitations imposed by the treaty had to decide what was more important, and the common consensus was that speed and firepower would be more important than armor protection. As you would see in the majority of the world's heavy cruisers built under the treaties, the armor protection was always lacking, but the speed and firepower were always quite good. This is noticeable when you compare the treaty cruisers to the cruisers that were built during World War II. The Northamptons carried about 3 to 4 inches of belt armor compared to, let's say, the Baltimore's 6 inches, so that is a significant difference in armor protection. Nevertheless, the 6 ships of the Northampton class, the Northampton, the Chester, the Louisville, the Chicago, the Houston, and the Augusta, did provide valuable service during World War II. 3 of the ships, the Northampton, the Chicago, and the Houston, were sunk during World War II, the other 3 being decommissioned shortly after. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy this episode on the Northampton-class heavy cruisers.
On February 6, 1922, an agreement was concluded between the world's naval powers that was designed to end the hugely expensive naval arms race that had helped ignite the First World War.
At the end of World War I, Great Britain was bankrupt. She couldn't sustain a naval arms race. The United States did not want to sustain a naval arms race, particularly with Japan. And Germany was out of the picture, having been paralyzed by the Versailles Treaty. So the major nations got together in Washington in 1922 and signed the Naval Arms Treaty, which in essence provided for the scrapping of large numbers of heavy capital ships, but also enabled the construction of cruisers, heavy and light cruisers.
They were categorized as either heavy cruisers, that is, having main battery guns of 6.2 inches or larger caliber, or light cruisers of 6.1 or smaller inches.
The treaty did, however, restrict the displacement of heavy cruisers to 10,000 tons and the maximum size of their guns to 8 inches. The unexpected result of the Washington Treaty was a building boom in cruisers, scores of them being constructed worldwide over the next 20 years. The tonnage restrictions also led to important changes in cruiser design. Believing speed and hitting power were more important than protection, designers loaded as many 8-inch guns as possible onto their heavy cruisers, keeping the weight down by substituting aluminum where possible for the heavier steel. The result were the so-called treaty cruisers.
Target: Wochi Island, Central Pacific, in the Marshall Islands chain. Enterprise's task force cruiser USS Northampton kicks off the attack. Her 8-inch guns hurl their 260-pound projectiles 5 miles across the sea to their targets on the island. Closing to within 3.5 miles, Northampton can now use her smaller 5-inch guns to assault the shore batteries.
They were firing shells over the Japanese shore batteries. And instead of hitting the shore batteries with direct hits, the shells were exploding over the shore batteries and showering those positions with shrapnel.
USS Northampton is 600 feet long and 66 feet wide and displaces 9,000 tons. She has a top speed of 32.5 knots. With 9 8-inch guns, 4 5-inch rifles, 8 50 caliber machine guns, and 6 torpedo tubes, she is a force to be reckoned with. The island of Wochi is experiencing that force this morning. Back at Task Force 61, radar operators report a massive Japanese air group headed right for them. The carriers steam in 2 tight circles, 10 miles apart, their battleships, cruisers, and destroyers close by. Just as the Japanese air attack closes in on Task Force 61, Enterprise enters the cover of a rain squall. The concealment of the low clouds will keep the Japanese from finding the Big E. For the moment, she's safe. Hornet is not so lucky. 20,000 feet above the American ships, the enemy strike closes in on carrier Hornet. The pilots that attack Hornet at Santa Cruz are among the finest in the Imperial Navy, veterans of Pearl Harbor and Midway. These Japanese airmen are literally the last of their kind.
The air attack that's delivered against Hornet is one of the finer examples of a combined air attack. In fact, it would be the last of the sort of prototypical combined attacks that the Japanese were able to do during the entire war.
The skies above USS Hornet are clouded with a storm of Japanese aircraft. From his battle station on the starboard 5-inch battery, Earl Miller has a front row seat to the enemy assault.
I saw some silver aircraft going over, and ours weren't silver, ours were blue. All the ships in the group all opened fire. Things really happened from that moment on.
21 Val dive bombers and 27 Kate torpedo planes plummet out of the skies and pour down on Hornet. American ships open up on the armada of Japanese aircraft and blanket the sky with bursts of 5 and 1.1-inch shells. 3,000 yards behind Hornet, cruiser Northampton and her crew of tested veterans plow through the wake directly behind the carrier. As the battle rages all around, Northampton waits to open fire. Her short-range, 5-inch 25 caliber anti-aircraft guns just don't have the reach to hammer the enemy planes. Tense moments pass as her gunners await their orders.
There's this agonizing wait. It's like the don't shoot till you see the whites of their eyes.
Finally, the enemy planes drop down within range. Northampton opens up with everything she's got.
So we started firing as soon as they got in range, and then you can see shell bursts actually begin to take effect, and occasionally you'll see a plane get hit and come down in a streak of fire.
5,000 feet above Hornet, the Vals begin their deadly assault.
I looked straight up and I saw there was a dive bomber coming straight down. And as I watched him, I saw a bomb detach from the bottom of the plane. I said, oh, I hope this one's not for us.
At the last possible second, it misses the ship and explodes in the water. But not all of the Japanese Vals have such bad aim. The next pilot is dead on. A bomb nails Hornet's flight deck and scatters shrapnel across the ship. Enterprise's sister shakes from stem to stern. Nearly 60 men below decks perish within an instant of the savage explosion. The lucky ones never know what hits them. Now, torpedo pilots attack Hornet from the rear, drawing them into a gauntlet of fire. But it doesn't stop them. They're hell-bent on hitting the racing carrier. At that same moment, another dive bomber lines up for an attack. As it closes in on Hornet, it's met with a ferocious volley of fire. But it keeps on coming. The bomber pushes into a nosedive. Seconds later, it smashes right into the stack of USS Hornet. The plane bounces off the ship's island and crashes into the flight deck in a ball of mangled, twisted steel. 7 men aboard Hornet are killed instantly. The suicide plane has scorched the tripod signal mast and has left a wing jammed in the smoke funnel. Aviation fuel burns through the flight deck. And the nightmare is only beginning. 2 torpedo planes survive the rapid fire of the task force guns. They come in from the southeast, release their torpedoes, and blow 15-foot holes in the Hornet's hull. Hornet loses all power and comes to a halt. She's a sitting duck, the perfect target for the next Japanese torpedo or dive bomber. She doesn't have to wait long for the next brutal blow. Another burning valve closes in on the listing carrier. Her crew watches as the smoking bomber passes eerily around the bow and comes screaming in from the port side. For the second time this day, Hornet is the victim of a suicide attacker. The painful ordeal aboard USS Hornet continues. She's already been savaged by direct hits with 550-pound bombs and 2 torpedoes, and she's dead in the water.
I couldn't count the number of bomb hits and torpedo hits she took, but she took a terrible beating. She was already listing very much to starboard. So, and that's when our skipper decided that he would go and help Hornet.
Northampton has fought beside Hornet all morning. Now her role is one of rescue.
They dropped a towing wire to us. It's about a 2.5-inch steel towing wire.
The after-gun mount on Northampton becomes a giant ball hitch. Amazingly, she begins to tow the massive carrier at an impressive 5 knots. Captain Mason is now certain that his ship can be saved. All he needs is time. But on Enterprise, Admiral Kincaid wrestles with what to do next. If the Japanese hit the Big E again, she may not make it, and the U.S. will have no more battle-ready carriers to take her place in the Pacific. Admiral Kincaid has 2 options. He can stay and continue the battle, risking Enterprise and the lives of everyone aboard, or he can abandon Hornet and head south to save his battered task force. Kincaid makes the painful decision to withdraw. Now the Big E must leave her sister Hornet to an uncertain fate.
Rather than continuing to leave the Enterprise, South Dakota, and all the other ships in the battle area, continuing to make them vulnerable to enemy air attack, the decision was made to withdraw them. Enterprise is already hit. Enterprise is damaged. Enterprise is bleeding. It's time to get out before the costs elevate too high. It's time to break contact with the enemy and pull away.
Enterprise heads for the American base in New Caledonia, leaving her bloodied sister Hornet on her own. 4 p.m. The crew of USS Hornet have managed to get the fires on their ship under control, and have even got steam pressure in 3 of her boilers. And with a little help from USS Northampton, it looks like Hornet might be saved after all. But what the men of Hornet do not know is that a final Japanese attack has been launched to finish them off. 6,000 feet above, 7 Kate torpedo planes fly in and prepare for their attack. Cruiser Northampton must break off her tow line and fend for herself. But a Kate scores a direct hit on Hornet that detonates amidships. This is the fatal blow. For USS Hornet, the situation is hopeless. With his ship taking on water and fires breaking out, Captain Mason orders the crew to abandon ship. Now his men must face the shark-infested waters and try to make it aboard another ship.
I swam out for a ways, and then I saw a group of others on a life raft, so I swam toward that. And then a destroyer came along and picked us up out of this life raft, and I was about probably the last one to get out of the life raft. As soon as I got up on that net climbing up the side there, the captain ordered full speed ahead, and that destroyer started to get out of there.
As Captain Mason slips over the side of his ship, he leaves behind the bodies of more than 100 officers, sailors, and Marines. Many of the wounded survivors make it aboard one of the destroyer escorts, or cruiser Northampton.
These guys were covered with fuel oil, a lot of them, and we didn't have very much left in the way of small stores or clothing to issue to them. So Northampton crewmen opened their lockers, and we gave these guys clean skivvies and socks and dungarees and shoes and cigarettes and whatever they needed.
Radioing from his headquarters in Noumea, Admiral Bull Halsey orders the Hornet sunk. But not even 3 torpedoes and nearly 400 shells are enough to kill her. Hornet simply refuses to die. Later that evening, Japanese ships discover the Hornet, the very same ship that launched the Doolittle raid on their homeland 6 months before. Finally, after a salvo of Japanese torpedoes, the Big E's sister slips beneath the waves.
Losing her is a very serious blow. We're now down to 1 operational aircraft carrier in the Solomons, and describing the Enterprise as operational is really stretching it at this point.
In total, more than 400 American officers, sailors, pilots, and Marines perish in the Battle of Santa Cruz Islands.
The day afterward, there were, I think it was 6 Hornet sailors had died of their wounds in our sick bay. And we buried them at sea. And that was, I guess, probably the toughest. You know, you ask how we felt about it. Well, I think that brought it home to us.
A force of cruisers and destroyers heads for Guadalcanal, escorting American transports loaded with much-needed reinforcements. More ground troops are needed on the island battlefield, and it's the job of these ships to get them there. One of them is heavy cruiser USS Chicago. Chicago, sister to the old Northampton, which had fought beside the Enterprise throughout 1942, is led by a squadron of 6 destroyers spread out in a giant half-circle. Steaming at a steady 24 knots, Chicago and the transport force are 150 shark-infested nautical miles directly southeast of Guadalcanal. Chicago has already survived 1 hellish attack this night by enemy aircraft. But the waters of the Solomon Islands are still a nightmare. Sailors know that being in the wrong place at the wrong time can have deadly consequences. And right now, Chicago is heading toward disaster she can't even see. Beneath the waves, Chicago is stalked by Japanese submarines. From above the clouds, she is hunted by enemy planes. Though the Japanese have been badly bloodied in Pacific Sea battles, they're about to show the U.S. Navy that they're nowhere close to being beaten. Like a jungle predator, the enemy prepares to strike in the dark of night. Because of the costly actions at Midway and Guadalcanal, Japan simply lacks the manpower and firepower to launch daytime attacks against the U.S. fleet.
They've trained a number of their ground-based medium bomber units in night torpedo attacks, and they come gunning for the American cruiser support force.
7:45 p.m. Flashes of light illuminate the American ships like a lightning storm. Japanese flares burst in the skies over the water. Suddenly, 16 twin-engine Bettys pour out of the sky. One Betty is chewed up by automatic fire and sent crashing into the sea. The rest charge in from the starboard side and head for Chicago with a payload of aerial torpedoes. Chicago cuts loose with an eruption of fire from her 5-inch guns and machine guns. But her own bright tracers and the fireballs of exploding aircraft only expose the cruiser to the enemy.
You're basically saying to the enemy, hey, I'm this guy with the big guns.
She is now the perfect target. 2 torpedoes nail the starboard side. Chicago grinds to a halt. She instantly takes on water and starts to list at the stern. Her situation is desperate. As the wave of Bettys tears off into the silver clouds, sailors aboard Chicago know that their battle is only just beginning.
During the pitch blackness then, the cruiser Louisville comes up and is able to put a towing line across, which is a tricky thing to do in the middle of the night with no illumination. and they begin to drag Chicago out of the battle area.
A 2.5-inch steel towing wire is wrapped around a massive 8-inch turret on the cruiser Louisville and attached to the bow of the Chicago. January 30th, 1943. As the sun rises over the Solomon Sea, warplanes roll down Enterprise's wooden deck and take off in search of the crippled USS Chicago. Just after 7 a.m., Enterprise SBDs locate Chicago and her task force.
Well, she just couldn't get underway, so she was being towed by another ship at about 4 knots, just barely getting underway.
It's a haunting replay of attempts to save USS Hornet at Santa Cruz. Enterprise's sister ship Hornet was crippled by torpedoes in the October battle. Before she could be towed to safety, she was finished off by another round of warheads. If the Japanese return, Chicago will provide an inviting target.
For a surface ship, they have basically 2 non-offensive weapons at their disposal. 1 is speed, 2 is maneuverability. When you go in, attach a tow line to a disabled ship, and try to pull her to safety, you've just given up speed and you've given up maneuverability. So you've made yourself pretty predictable.
Enterprise's warplanes carefully patrol the air over the damaged cruiser, on the lookout for enemy intruders. At the same time, the fleet tug Navajo comes alongside Chicago and takes over the task of pulling the heavy ship. Tense hours pass as Enterprise pilots watch the rescue operation unfold. For the moment, the skies are clear. Not a single enemy plane or ship in sight. 4 p.m. Enterprise receives warnings from Guadalcanal. 11 unidentified aircraft. Distance, 130 miles. Everyone goes to general quarters, mans his gun or repair station. Ammo is broken out of lockers. Gunners' mates put on helmets and life jackets. Below decks, watertight doors are shut. Plane handlers take their positions in the hangar or flight deck. The ship is cleared for action. Every sailor and marine awaits the enemy strike.
The Japanese, however, are aware that they have done some damage to the American force, and they come gunning for the Chicago.
Enterprise immediately launches more Wildcats to meet the Japanese threat. 60 miles out, the twin-engine bombers race towards the American task force. Now, Enterprise's crew relies on their first line of defense, the fighter squadron nicknamed the Grim Reapers. One of them is Don Flash Gordon, a gritty veteran of Santa Cruz.
I tally-hoed 11 Bettys, twin-engine torpedo planes. They were at 1 o'clock again, and they're really fast. They were going to cut behind us, so we made a hard turn to the port. We ended up a little bit behind them.
With Gordon in the lead, the Grim Reapers maneuver into position, ready to defend the fleet, or die trying.
We stayed on their right side and tried to get ahead of them in case they wanted to go to the Enterprise instead of Chicago.
Gordon and the Reaper Wildcats close the distance between the enemy planes as the Japanese flyers race toward the Chicago.
There was a formation of 6 in an echelon, the lead echelon, and 5 in the second.
As the Bettys storm over the task group, the Wildcats bear down with withering 50 caliber firepower.
I burned that lead airplane and it fell out of formation, and the second one was burning and it was falling out.
Gordon and the pilots of Fighting Squadron 10 hammer the enemy airstrike.
Our planes did a very, very good job and practically wiped out that enemy fleet of planes.
But somehow, 4 Bettys survived the Grim Reapers and released their warheads on USS Chicago. At the last possible moment, Navajo tries to turn Chicago to face the enemy and make her a smaller target. But just as Navajo pulls the cruiser head-on with the enemy, the fearsome torpedoes pound into Chicago's hull and detonate in a horrendous blast. The Big Northeast pilots are quick to defend their comrades. Gordon and his fellow aces sweep in and pour hot lead into the enemy strike force. 9 enemy planes are blasted into the afterlife. Only 2 will survive their encounter with Enterprise.
One went east and one went southeast. And the nearest one was going east, and I down on the water, and so I got on the water and raised my nose to fire at him. I'm sure I had full throttle on, but I wasn't catching him.
But the damage is done. Back on USS Chicago, her survivors abandon ship and can only stand by and watch the bitter end. Below decks, seawater pours through the torpedo holes, rushes over bulkheads, and fills compartments, one after another. From her lower holds and engine rooms to the storage areas, magazines, and passageways, Chicago is soon completely flooded. As she takes on more weight, she slowly starts to roll to her starboard side. Then, her heavy superstructure pulls her right over on her side, and Chicago quickly slips beneath the waves. The whole sinking takes only 19 minutes. For 62 American sailors, this ship is their final resting place.
Chicago is then the last large American warship that's lost during the Guadalcanal fight.
It was one of our favorite heavy cruisers.
And that's all, folks, for this episode on the Northampton-class heavy cruisers. That's pretty much all the footage I could find about these particular ships, so hopefully that's at least giving you a decent overview of the ship and their service careers. If you like what I'm doing, don't forget to click the subscribe button below and become one of the submarines in the fleet. Aside from that, from what I know so far, the Northampton-class heavy cruisers should appear in World of Warships as the Tier 6 American heavy cruiser. At least that's what we know from what's been released in the tech tree so far. So aside from that, I hope you all have a fantastic day, and I'll see you all on the high seas soon.